Welcome to the Determined People podcast, bringing encouragement, strength, and hope to a world that's in desperate need of it. You know, leadership is about doing what's right, even when you have to stand alone. And our guest today, he knows about doing what's right, even when he had to stand alone. Vic Feazell is a name many of you are probably familiar with. Vic was the district attorney in McClennan County when he got a call from the Texas Rangers. They said, "We have confessions from a man who would solve 3 cases under your jurisdiction. Do you want to have your picture taken with the Rangers when they close the cases?" Well, when you're a politician whose political stock was on the rise, of course you would. But he didn't take it at face value. When doing his due diligence, Vic saw some things that gave him pause. This set off a maelstrom of events. This altered Vic's life and the life of his family forever. The alleged murderer, Henry Lee Lucas, another name you're probably familiar with if you're in Texas for sure. He's also known as the confession killer from the Netflix documentary of the same name. He was a stooge for the task force the Texas Rangers had established. Lucas confessed to literally hundreds of murders all across the nation. Vic found himself a force of one who was portrayed as someone who was anti-law enforcement, even though as DA, he was law enforcement. We're going to talk about this and other struggles that Vic has overcome during his life. Welcome, Vic. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, John. Thank you for inviting me.
Glad you're here. We got a lot to cover, so we're going to get started. What made you decide to study law?
It just came all of a sudden. I was a senior in college. I was in my last semester of college. I had a major in religion, a major in sociology with an emphasis in social work. My plan was to be a missionary. I wanted to be a home missionary like my dad had been, and be assigned to an Indian reservation, perhaps in New Mexico. And that's what I was planning. And then in one of those social work classes, we had to do some role playing, and we drew our role out of a hat. We sat in a circle, and I drew the role for a lawyer for a young kid that had been arrested for drugs. And we started doing that role playing back and forth, and I thought, gee, this feels good. I could do this. So I started looking into the possibility of law school. I'd already been accepted to the seminary, Southwest Seminary. And I had pastored 2 small churches in Bell County, enough to know that from my experience in those 2 churches and from my experience growing up as the son of a preacher. My dad was a Baptist pastor. We moved about every 2 years, and I saw what church politics was like. And I kind of decided if I'm going to have to play politics, I'll play real politics instead of playing it in the church. And just on a fluke, I decided to apply to Baylor Law. Everybody else that I met along that process was applying to several law schools. I applied to one because I didn't have any money, and Baylor was the only one in driving distance. I lived in Belton at the time. And they accepted me. Really surprised me. I wasn't expecting it. I actually got a letter saying, "Dear Mr. Feazell, we're sorry to inform you that you didn't make the cut, blah, 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 blah. But we put you on our short list, our waiting list. And if somebody doesn't tell us they're coming, they don't pay their entrance fee, well, then you're next in line." And about a week later, I get another letter saying, "Congratulations, you're in Baylor Law." And I go, "Oh my God, I'm not ready. I need to work a year or 2. But I knew not to turn them down or I'd never get in. So I went, and I went as far as my savings would let me go, 2 quarters. And then I had to drop out and start working. I jokingly tell people, John, that I crammed 3 years of law school into only 7 short years. Because I go a while and then have to drop out and work. And ended up finally being hired by MHMR and worked my way up to being director of their drug abuse treatment program, where it was very successful. We were the #1 program in the state after I took it over.
But you were the number 19 or something like that.
When I took it over, it was number 19. It was the last in the state. Plus, the only reason they picked me to run it is that everybody over me in the chain of command had gotten indicted for negligent homicide because they accidentally overdosed about 50 heroin addicts on methadone.
Oh, no.
Yeah, 5 of them died.
Mm.
Nothing ever came of those charges, but it ruined those men's careers.
Mm-hmm.
And the director of the program comes to me and said, Vic, you're next in line. Will you just keep things going for a while? Be our acting director. So I said, okay, I'll give it a shot. So I was their acting director. And within a year, we had gone from number 19 to number 2. And then the second year, we were number 1. And then that's when the board of directors said, God, this guy we just put in the acting position is doing pretty good. Let's hire him. So that's how I became director of the drug abuse treatment program. And we stayed number 1 for the rest of my tenure, 7 more years. And I got real good at writing grants. I hired some really good people to work for me. And after a while, I approached the director of MHMR and I said, Dean, his name was Dean Mayberry, a mentor of mine, great guy. And I said, Dean, I really think I could, if you'll let me, I will cut my salary in half and I can do this job in 20 hours a week. And I'll just be the administrator and hire some good PhDs to do the group therapy. Because I'd been doing Gestalt, reality therapy, family therapy. He said, okay, give it a shot, because he was always very supportive. I was so lucky to have some good mentors in my life.
Absolutely.
And he was one of them. And so I cut my position in half, and that's when I went back to law school and worked half-time until practice court. Practice court is pretty severe. That's your last 2 semesters of law school at Baylor, and they teach trial lawyers at Baylor. And it's very demanding. So when I started practice court, I was able to resign from MHMR. I still kept contact with them and helped as much as I could, but I did resign and went to law school full time and then graduated. Took the bar before I graduated. You could do that back then. That was the old days. And on the day I graduated law school, I got my bar scores in the mail. They didn't have the internet yet. Right. They had to mail it to you. And so that was on a Saturday. That Monday, I was down in front of the district judge in McClennan County there in Waco saying, swear me in. He swore me in. He had to go to the law books and find the oath, because most everybody else would wait and go down to the Supreme Court and get sworn in. And I did that too for my second swearing in. But I had him swear me in that day, and then I said, now appoint me on a case. He said, I can't do that. You just got out of law school just like 2 days ago. I said, do it. I went to Baylor. I can do this. Yeah. So he appointed me on a case. He said, there's one hitch. She has filed a pro se motion for speedy trial, and I want this thing tried in 10 days. I said, you got it, Judge.
Did you sleep for the next 10 days?
I did, because anything was easier than practice court at Baylor. It took me 6 months before I could watch a TV show without feeling guilty because I wasn't doing homework. So I tried that case, and that was my first not guilty verdict.
That's awesome.
And then I just started stacking them up after that until about 2 years later, I ran for DA.
Why'd you run for DA?
That's so funny. I hate to even admit this. I had been court appointed on a felony. Most of my cases before then had been misdemeanors, but the judge appointed me on a major felony. And it was assigned to the first assistant DA. That's the second in command under the DA. I didn't know this guy. I had heard about him. I'd heard his name. And to me, he was some kind of big shot, first assistant DA, and me just a young guy barely in an office, because my first few months, I practiced out of the trunk of my car.
This is the stuff movies are made about.
I know. You know? I know. When I saw that movie Lincoln Lawyer, I said, oh my God, that was me. Yep. And so I called this guy and I said, I want to come talk to you about this case, see what we can work out. Because I knew my man was guilty, and it wasn't one I necessarily wanted to try, but they knew that I could really hold their feet to the fire and they ought to give me a decent deal. So I got an appointment through his secretary. I showed up at the appointed time, as best I remember, it was around 10 a.m. And I sat, and I sat, and I sat. And this was before cell phones, so I had nothing to look at except some magazines on the table that were about 2 years old. Mm-hmm. And I'd get up every once in a while and go to the desk and say, you know, I got an appointment with Mr. Malone. And I go, well, I'm sorry, he knows you're here. And I waited a while longer, and clock's ticking along, and pretty soon it's almost noon. I'd been sitting out there for 2 hours. And then he comes walking through the lobby with another man. Door opens, he's walking through, boisterous, laughing, and just walks right past me. And I said, sir, Mr. Malone, we have an appointment. You're supposed to see me at 10 today. And man, he spun on his heels, and he glared at me. He says, I know who you are, and I know why you're here. And if you're representing that man, you're just as bad as he is. I go, what? Because I'm court appointed, you know, I'm just doing my duty, what the judge told me to. He said, no, you're just as bad as he is. And he got up in my face and was poking me on the chest. And when he did, that's when I smelled the alcohol all over his breath. And then he spun on his heels again. He and the other guy walked out laughing. And just as he opened the door, I said, you know what? I'm going to run for DA just so I can fire your ass. And it was just a spur-of-the-moment temper tantrum is what it was. And I kind of regret it in a way, but I guess it was divine order, because I left that lobby and went out and started making plans to run for DA. I didn't have a dime in my pocket, John. I didn't. I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I had been working on a case against a local bank. Gary Richardson, a lawyer in Tulsa, Oklahoma, had come to Waco looking for somebody to help him on a case against this bank. And he had been to 6 lawyers, and nobody would help him because they were all indebted to that bank, and they were afraid of what that banker might do. That's back when local banks controlled things in a town. Mm-hmm. Now it's conglomerates. You know how that is.
Absolutely,
I mean,
yes.
Everything got all bought up there in the late 80s. So somebody finally said to Gary, you know, there's this new kid right down the sidewalk there. He might help you. And he came to
He doesn't know any better.
He doesn't know any better. Yeah, that's basically what they told him. Plus, I didn't have any debt to the local bank. Mm-hmm. And so I handled that case with Gary. And after I filed for DA, that case settled. And suddenly I got a big check. The biggest check I'd ever seen. And I used that money to run for DA. I didn't even have to ask people for money. People started coming and giving me money, making contributions after they realized I was a serious candidate. But my opponent didn't take me seriously at all. He hired a big shot pollster from Austin, and this pollster told him, best thing you can do is just not screw up. I'd go on vacation and just let this kid ruin it for himself. And he did. He went on vacation to Colorado, and when he came back, I was already like 20 points ahead of him.
Did you put that pollster on your Christmas list?
I should have. I should have. But it was still a close election. But for him to have been an incumbent and me just barely 2 years out of law school, I spanked him pretty bad.
No kidding.
Yeah.
That is unheard of.
And it was also I could fire his first assistant.
Did you fire him?
I got his letter of resignation. He waited until after I won the general election because there was somebody running in that one too. Mm-hmm. Back then, Texas was still a one-party state, so the general election didn't have much chance.
Sure.
But he waited till the last week and then sent me a letter of resignation. And they wouldn't let us into the office either. I mean, I had a transition team. They locked the doors, wouldn't show us anything. There were murder cases about to go to trial. We show up, They wouldn't let me in until I was sworn in on January 1st.
That's pretty petty.
Wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And so then I was given the key. I go in with my transition team and find files all over the floor. All the drains stopped up with paper and prescription drugs, and it was just a mess. It took us all day long to clean up. Some of his former staff had shown up for my swearing in, came in and saw what the office looked like. They were embarrassed by it. Mm. They chipped in and started helping clean up.
Really?
Yeah, they really did.
That's nice.
There are only, besides the first assistant, there are only 2 or 3 I eventually got rid of. I kept all the rest of them. Mm-hmm. They were good people. And I did with the DA's office what I did with MHMR, with the drug program. I hired good people and then tried to get out of their way. And after about a year at the DA's office, we had the top felony conviction rate in the state of Texas.
Really?
Yeah, we were in like the top 3 or 4% mm-hmm. for counties with a population over 100,000. Yeah.
So you had a talent for putting the right people in the right place, obviously.
I did.
Because that skill set transferred from MHMR over to the DA's office.
Uh-huh.
Tell me about when you got the phone call from the Rangers about Henry Lucas.
Yeah. I'd only been in office about 1.5 years. I had tried a couple high-profile murder trials. I was already getting a good reputation. The newspaper loved me. The TV stations loved me. There's already talk about me being the next attorney general. Mm. Jim Maddox and I had become friends. And then I get this phone call from Bob Prince, a sergeant with the Texas Rangers. Mr. Feazell, hey, we've got this guy down here. You might have heard of him, Henry Lee Lucas, and he's in our custody, and he's confessed to 3 murders in your county. We'd like to bring him up to Waco, and you just run him through some guilty pleas, get your picture taken with us, and we'll be on our way down the road to the next one. And I said, yeah, that sounds good. You know?
Yeah.
Because I'm a new DA, and I want to get reelected, and I grew up with the Texas Rangers, you know. To me, they were a legend. I believed them. The only thing I knew about Lucas was I had seen him on TV, walking around with Texas Rangers, pointing here, pointing there. Henry Lucas has confessed to yet another murder. And I was going, man, this guy's killed a lot of people. I'm sure glad the Rangers have him. Mm-hmm. That's what I believed. Because I was pro-law enforcement. I had, my first job out of high school was with the Austin Police Department. Mm-hmm. My daddy was a Baptist preacher. I was considered a pretty conservative kid. Mm-hmm. So I said, yeah, that's a good idea. Let's do that. But before you can let somebody plead guilty, you got to get them indicted first, you know. So I was going to run these to our grand jury and get 3 quick indictments, get him up, do 3 quick pleas, and get my picture taken, and there we go.
Get reelected.
Yeah, check.
Yes, sir.
Check that box off.
You said in The Confession Killer that the confessions seemed fishy.
They were fishy, John.
Why?
So when I decided to get him indicted, and I could have just gone up to the grand jury and said, you know, guys, Texas Rangers say that Henry Lucas killed these 3 people. But when I saw the names, one of the names was a lady named Dorothy Parks. Dorothy Parks was an African-American prostitute. Mm-hmm. Ended up dead, floating in a gravel pit. Mm-hmm. Yeah, all bloated. Thing is, we had like 5 more murders just like it. Same kind of ligature marks around the neck, same kind of stab wounds, look like the same weapon.
Makes you think they're connected.
Exactly, same MO. And at the same time that they're telling me that Lucas has confessed to Dorothy Parks, we've got a guy about to go to trial. His name was Joe Leeming. And Joe was a character, man. Tall, skinny, pale, always dressed in black. He looked like and acted like a vampire.
Mm-hmm.
He was a scary guy. And we had arrested Joe Leeming for the murder of another African-American prostitute.
Mm-hmm.
And we knew that he had done all 5 of them, because when he got arrested for the one that we were trying him on, the reason he got caught is because he got greedy. Before, he had always taken just one prostitute, taken her out into the woods, raped her, killed her with a knife.
Yeah.
This time he took 2. He tied one up and left her in the back seat and was going to come back and get her later. Well, she managed to get free, get her eye thing down. He had her eyes wrapped too, so she couldn't see. So she got her blindfold down, worked on the ropes that had her wrist tied, and that's when she saw Joe Leeming. This is her words. "I saw him come out of the woods, licking the blood off the knife and hunching the air like a dog." Wow. Yeah, she testified in court to this. It was quite something. And the way he was able to keep these women in the car was he'd pull up beside them on the street, and they would open the door and get in. Well, once they got in, the door handle on the inside had been removed, front and back, both sides of the back. So this lady, once she got her wrist free, she managed to climb over the seat, get out the door on the driver's side, and take off through the woods, still with one of the ropes around her leg. Mm-hmm. But she was able to get away from him and hide in the woods, scared to death. He looked for her a long time. And it was definitely Joe Leeming. And so Joe told our investigator, Truman Simons, "I'll tell you what, if you can get me convicted of this one I'm on trial for, I'll plead guilty to the rest of them." All of them, including the kidnapping of this other lady that we knew we could get him on because she could identify him. But during his trial, Lucas confessed to killing Dorothy Parks.
How did he
and
know
it made
about
the newspaper.
How did he know about Dorothy Parks?
Joe Leeming?
No, Lucas. How did Lucas know about her?
Because the Texas Rangers asked him about her. They had jurisdictions from all over the country mailing to them their unsolved case files. And the Waco Police Department sent them Dorothy Parks' file along with a bunch of others. And Henry looked at the files. They would show him the pictures, and he'd decide whether to take it or not. Yeah, and Henry says, "I wasn't going to take no kid killings. I wasn't going to say I killed any kids. But anything else, I'd say I'd done it."
There's suspicion in that statement alone. Oh, my gosh.
So anyway, Joe Leeming reads in the newspaper that Lucas had confessed to Dorothy Parks. And so then he wouldn't confess. Wow. Yeah. We had another one over in Belle Meade, an elderly man. Mm-hmm. We felt like his nephew had killed him, and we were building a case on that nephew because he was the only one to inherit the insurance money, the house, stuff like that. Yeah. And they were always in drunken fights with each other. And then we had another case that he confessed to, Rita Salazar. Mm-hmm. Wow, that's the one I really dug my heels in on. I knew he hadn't done Dorothy Parks. I knew it. I just knew it because of all the evidence we had. But the thing about Rita Salazar, Rita was a teenage girl from Georgetown. Mm-hmm. She and her boyfriend, Frank, had gone to Austin to the movies. Driving home, they ran out of gas. And they get out and start hitchhiking. They get picked up. Frank was killed in Williamson County and left in a ditch. Rita was taken all the way up to Waco. She was raped and shot several times and left in a ditch right outside of Hewitt, Texas, bedroom community of Waco. Mm-hmm. And so I had them bring me the confessions on Rita. I want to see what Henry said. I want to see his confession. Well, Truman Simons is a really good investigator. And so he started really looking into that because they had sent us one. He found out there had been 3 confessions, 2 from Henry and another one from Otis Toole. Otis, the old running buddy of Henry's, that they claimed they had killed all these people together, but they didn't.
Odd is a good name for him.
Yeah, it is. It is. Otis, yeah. None of the confessions matched up. None of them. And in Otis's confession, he claimed that Becky Powell and her little brother, Frank Powell, were in the car with him and helped them keep Rita in the car, not letting her escape. Now, these are kids that at that time were like 12 and 10 years old. Little kids. Mm-hmm. And Otis Toole is saying they were in the car with us. And Henry, in one of his, even alluded to maybe they were in the car. He said something about Frank and Becky. So the first thing we did was I had Truman contact the school in Jacksonville, Florida, where Becky and Frank went to school. Mm-hmm. They were in school that day. They were in school the next day. They had been in school the day before. You cannot get from Jacksonville, Florida to Waco, Texas, and murder somebody and then be back sitting in your desk in the 5th grade and acting like everything's fine and nothing happened. Right. You know? So I'm going, this makes no friggin' sense. So I decided just not to do anything. I just let it sit. Mm-hmm. Then I get another call from Bob Prince. Hey, Feazell, when are you going to let us complete these Lucas cases? I said, well, Bob, we're looking at it. So I had Truman. I said, Truman, this guy has confessed to a bunch of murders, man. Let's get a list of all the murders he's confessed to and the dates and see if we can figure out where Henry Lucas was on some of those dates. Mm-hmm. So he said, all right. And like I said, Truman was good. I don't know if you know this. Truman and I were great friends. Mm-hmm. He died just 2 weeks ago. Yeah, I really miss him.
He used to follow you home.
He did.
He thought you were going to get killed.
He was, in the height of all of this, he was afraid I was going to get shot or my car blown up.
Yeah.
So he would follow me at home at night. He did it a long time before I even knew he was doing it until I got suspicious of the headlights behind me, and it freaked me out. And so I get home, and I called Truman. I said, there's somebody following me home. He said, oh, that was me. But Truman started looking around, and he found right off the bat 10 or 12 cases that there's no way Henry could have done because we had receipts from a scrap metal yard where he and Otis used to sell scrap metal in Jacksonville, Florida. We had records from the convenience store across the street from the scrap metal place where they would cash the checks. Mm-hmm. And those checks had their signatures on the back. Mm-hmm. And here's something that really, really bothers me, John. During the Orange Sox trial, the only case Henry Lucas ever got the death penalty on, prosecuted in Georgetown, Texas by Ken Anderson, which is a name you'll know because he's been disbarred since all of this because of other things he did as a prosecutor and as a judge. Ken Anderson and the DA back then, his name will come to me in a minute, Ed Walsh. Mm-hmm. There were records from the scrapyard and from the convenience store with their signatures on the back knocking out Orange Sox, that they could not have done Orange Sox. So the DA gives that information to the DPS, Texas Department of Public Safety, handwriting experts. And they look at those signatures and they go, sorry guys, this is Lucas's signature. He was in Jacksonville.
But they ignored it.
They ignored it. They ignored it just like they did on Michael Morton You know, because Michael
Yes.
Morton is the reason that Ken Anderson no longer has a law license.
Yeah. The Innocence Project cleared him with DNA after
It did.
25 years in prison.
Yeah.
You know, the irony about Henry Lucas is one of the things he said in The Confession Killer is he trained himself, and I'm quoting, paraphrasing, he said, I trained myself to not ever leave a shred of evidence. The man had an IQ of 87.
I know.
Okay? There's always evidence. You can't confess to 600 murders and there not be a shred of evidence. But the evidence he did leave were these cash checks. Okay? So,
Yeah. Exonerating
Yes.
evidence.
Yes.
Yeah.
My God.
Henry said, it might have been the Japanese reporter said, well, you've done it so many different ways. What's your MO? What's your method of operation? He goes, well, my MO is that I don't have a MO. Isn't that convenient? Yeah. So anyway, Truman found like 10 or 12 right off the bat that he couldn't have done. And at that time, we had already prosecuted 2 of the Lake Waco murder cases, and we were about to go to Cleburne to prosecute the 3rd one on a change of venue. And there was an author in Dallas named Carlton Stowers who was writing a book about the Lake Waco murders. He came and attended nearly every day of every trial. The book is called Careless Whispers. It's still on the bestseller list.
Yeah.
It's still being published, not in hardback anymore. They're collector's items, but the paperbacks are still being published. So Truman mentions to Carlton Stowers, who was down one day, guess what we're working on now? Have you heard of this Henry Lucas guy? And Carlton goes, oh my, you need to meet Hugh Ainsworth. Hugh Ainsworth was a reporter with the Dallas Times-Herald.
At the time, yes.
And he and Carlton were friends. And Hugh had shared with Carlton what he had been up to. Hugh had been approached by Boutwell early on to do a book about Lucas. And Boutwell gave Hugh complete access to Henry Lucas in the jail in Georgetown. Let him come and go as he wanted. Problem is, Hugh was there the day the Japanese film crew shows up when Henry goes, yeah, guys, and I'm pretty sure I got one in your country too. And they go, well, how'd you get to Japan? He said, well, I drove. And by then, Hugh was starting to have his doubts. And you can see it on some of the old videos, even with him and Boutwell, and they even let him sit in on some of the confessions, where Hugh's face is like incredulous. Like, I don't believe this. I'm just not believing this. And it got to the point where Boutwell wasn't trusting Hugh anymore. He didn't think he was going to do a puff piece on the Rangers. He was afraid he was going to pick their cases apart. So he barred Hugh from the jail. Wouldn't let him see Henry anymore. Started spreading rumors that Hugh was against law enforcement. That's something I heard a lot, because when I came out, that's what they kept hitting me with. Feazell's just against law enforcement, you know. And not long after that, and before I met Hugh, Hugh's home was burglarized. He lives in a nice house in Dallas. He said I had recording equipment, I had fancy cameras, I had a nice TV, I had jewelry. None of it was touched. The only thing stolen were my cassette tapes of my interviews with Henry Lucas. He said, fortunately, that wasn't all of them. I had a bunch of them in a shoebox that I'd already filed away, but they got a bunch of them. He said, I covered the police beat the whole time I was with the Times-Herald. I know how policemen are, at least how they were then, and hopefully they're changing. He said, so I didn't even report it. I knew it would do no good. He said, the next time I see Boutwell, just kind of run into him, Boutwell comes up and says, oh, Hugh, I'm so sorry to hear about your house getting burglarized.
My God.
Hugh said, I never told anybody. So anyway,
Let me interject, because Ainsworth he had published a book about his interviews with Ted Bundy.
Yes.
So he had experience with one of the most violent, lethal serial killers ever.
Yeah.
And it had to have not added up when he met Henry.
It didn't. Yeah, his book was called The Only Living Witness. That's still a bestseller, too. He was quite a writer.
Yes.
And quite an investigator. So Carlton told us about Hugh. So then we reached out to Hugh, not knowing if he would be willing to cooperate or not. And he said, hell yeah, I'll cooperate. And he drove down and he brought us everything he had. And he had been doing a lot of work that Boutwell and the Rangers didn't know about. He had traveled all over the United States gathering information on where Henry was when. Not only that, he had gone to West Virginia and Maryland and interviewed all of Henry's family. Henry actually had a wife named Betty Crawford. And Hugh interviewed Betty because they had Henry killing somebody like 2 days after he was released from the Maryland prison after serving the sentence for killing his mom in a drunken brawl. And they had packed murders into that short little period of time, and his family is going, no. He took the bus straight here, and when he got here, he didn't leave. I mean, if he'd have left, we'd have known about it. He didn't even have a car.
Ainsworth did the work that law enforcement should have been doing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They were enjoying the glory. They were enjoying the credit and not really giving a care about the truth. So
I think it's important to mention here, because we're going to talk about this later, and it's in The Confession Killer. Lucas always said that he, sounds gross, but this is what he said, that he liked to have sex with the dead bodies. But in prison, Henry got stabbed in the groin. He was impotent. He couldn't have sex. The Texas Rangers and Boutwell knew this.
they knew it. It was in his prison records. Matter of fact, those records are on file somewhere on my website, vicfeazell.com. Henry's old prison records. They show that he was stabbed in the groin with a piece of glass, and I think it was a light bulb, and he was impotent after that. And so he would say, yeah, I'd always say I had sex with them just to see what they, because I can't have sex.
There's no DNA.
No. Yeah, and there was never any DNA. Yeah. If it had sex with him, there would have been DNA.
He was the Einstein of serial killers if he was telling the truth. But
yeah,
we know he
sure.
wasn't. Yes.
Yeah.
So you convened a grand jury, and you had to get an extension of that grand jury because they have a finite period of time. What happened then?
Well, our original grand jury, I can't remember if it was 6 weeks or 2 months. Maddox and I went to Judge Allen, our district judge, and asked for this special grand jury to look into the circumstances of how Henry could have confessed to these 3 murders in our county. One we knew he didn't commit. One we were pretty sure he didn't commit. And the Rita Salazar, it just didn't add up. And so the judge said, all right, I'll give you this grand jury. And boy, we got to work. Hugh Ainsworth was one of our first witnesses.
He must have been a treasure trove of information.
Oh, God, he was. He was. He was just great. The thing is, though, by then, we had gotten Henry away from the task force. We had to do some legal wrangling with a court order to go down and get Henry away from them. And that really got the news people going crazy. So our hallways were just full of news people. And all those news people knew Hugh Ainsworth and want to know why Hugh was there. And Hugh didn't want anybody to know because his article hadn't come out yet. It wasn't going to come out for like 4 or 5 more days. And he didn't want to walk through all that crowd of reporters. Well, outside that courthouse, going up to that 4th floor grand jury room is a rickety old fire escape that probably hadn't been used in 50 years.
Did you make him go up the fire escape?
I didn't make it. That was Hugh's idea. I had Truman stand at the bottom. I said, "Now you catch him if he falls from those 4 floors." But you went up that fire escape and in through the window to testify at that grand jury, and then was able to get out and get back to Dallas. And 3 days later, his article comes out.
In a bit of irony, which we will talk about later, Hugh shared his information with Tracy Rowlett, who was with Belo Corporation's Channel 8, and they released it on the same day because they both realized they were working on the same thing. And it was very collegial for media sources to cooperate like that and not try to one up the other. I don't think we see that today,
No.
but that was, and the irony we'll talk about later.
Yeah, definitely, because Tracy Rowlett knew that Henry hadn't done all that stuff. He knew it, but he went to the dark side because he was pressured by Colonel Jim Adams. But Hugh even went to West Virginia and to Maryland. Deborah Sue Williamson was a murder that Joyce Lemons and her husband were interested in.
Yes.
And they helped finance those trips. Matter of fact, Mr. Lemons went with Hugh. I have him on videotape interviewing some of Henry's family. Yeah.
Joyce Lemons is in The Confession Killer. And
She is.
You can just see the pain in her. I mean, she's still living with a lot of pain that she was duped by the police because they closed that case with Lucas, and they knew Lucas didn't do it. They fed him information.
They did, and her husband, Bob, was quite a guy. He spent most of his life savings tracking down where Henry was, trying to prove that it wasn't Henry that killed his stepdaughter. Joyce never got to see The Confession Killer. She died a week before it came out.
I think The Confession Killer was dedicated to her.
It was.
Yes.
Because she had died,
Yeah. What
right
a great
before
honor.
it came out.
Post-mortem.
Yeah.
Wow.
And her daughter and I, we're working some together now, still trying to get something done on Deborah Sue's case.
It still hasn't been solved.
No. And it's just so old. It's not likely that it will, because everything's already been checked for DNA. Now, on Rita Salazar, the one I talked about before, 30 years later, a young DA in Abel Reyna's office said, "I want to work on a cold case." So what's your coldest case? He said, "I don't know. Go in the evidence locker and look." So he goes to looking. He finds Rita Salazar's file. He's interested in that because he remembers that name. He used to be an assistant DA in Georgetown. So he had heard that name before. Fortunately, when we got all that file from Georgetown, we took her underwear, her panties, and you know what a seal-a-meal bag is? You know, that thing that makes the vacuum?
Sure.
We put them in there. Stuck it in a file.
Fortunately.
Yeah. It had been back in that evidence locker for over 30 years. And he pulls it, sends those panties off for a DNA analysis. They put it into the data bank and immediately got a hit to a known sex offender.
Yeah.
So they arranged with an investigator out of Georgetown to start tracking the guy. And they followed him for days. He was living with his mother. He had been released from prison only recently for a sex assault offense. And when they sat down and talked with him, he just came clean. He confessed. He told how it happened. He told about killing Frank, then driving on up the road and killing Rita. They took a DNA swab from him, even though he had already hit through the data bank. They took one from his mouth, sent it to the lab, and it was a positive match as well. And that man's in prison now.
As I recall, Rita Salazar's family hated you.
Oh, God, they hated me, yeah. Her sister in particular,
Yes.
her sister hated George Bush when he commuted orange socks.
Yes.
You're letting the killer of my sister go free. All right. She was mad at both of us. She was mad at Maddox. She was holding press conferences. But then when this happened, she called me. She said, I just want to apologize to you. She said, I've been mad at you for 30 years, and now I'm so glad you did what you did. Otherwise, it would have been a closed case, not a cold case.
Right.
Closed cases are never looked at again. Cold cases are.
Mm-hmm.
If you'd have said, let me look at a cold case, and going back into that evidence locker, Rita wouldn't have been there because it would have been closed. But because it was a cold case instead of a closed case, we were able to find out who the real murderer was.
How did that impact you when she called you and apologized?
I thought it was really sweet of her. I did. And she wants to be on my podcast.
Does she really?
She was scheduled to be on over a year ago.
Then the pandemic
And
hit.
then the pandemic hit. And
Wow.
this is such an important one because it kind of just ties everything together. It puts a bow on top of it. Because Rita is the one I was really talking about in the arrest video, where I point my fingers at the camera and I say, you know what's going on here, and I'll still be proven right. I was talking about Henry. I was talking about the Rita Salazar case in particular, because that one pissed me off. Because I knew we already had Joe Leeming doing life in prison for the one we had just convicted him of. He wasn't going to be getting out anytime soon. Glenn Parks, I felt sorry for him not having his murderer found, especially if it was the nephew that's enjoying the fruit of the crime. Sure. But we were never able to do anything with it. Once they hear that Henry has confessed, they shut up. But
you went and met with Colonel Jim Adams, who was the head of the Texas Rangers, former associate director of the FBI under Hoover, but then he was Texas Rangers, the lead of that. Tell us about that meeting. Didn't go quite like you planned.
No, it didn't. We already had done several weeks of the grand jury by then. We had a file this thick. We had spreadsheets that showed evidence of where Henry was, and then these murders you say he committed, and there's no way. You cannot be in Florida and commit a murder in California 2 hours later. You cannot be in jail in Montague County because they cleared one after he was already arrested by the Rangers, a lady named Hermine DeFore in South Louisiana. But they were packing them so tight that they cleared Hermine DeFore's murder with Henry Lucas, even though he was in their custody. Now, come on. That's just reckless. It's reckless. They're feeling so bulletproof. But I take all this information, and I don't go by myself. Two of Jim Maddox's top assistants go with me.
Maddox was Attorney General at the time.
Jim Maddox was the Attorney General, and he had agreed to help me with this. I drove down and visited with Jim right before we started the grand jury, and it was Jim who went with me to visit the judge to say, yeah, I'm going to help with this. Give us this grand jury. You had asked me before about why the grand jury didn't go forward. When that first term of the grand jury was about to expire, Maddox and I go back and ask for it to be extended. The judge said no. We still had out-of-state witnesses coming in. We had already heard from Chris Piazza, who is the DA from Little Rock, Arkansas, who is now a federal judge in Arkansas, telling about a case he had prosecuted, a guy named Scotty Scott,
Yes.
who murdered a convenience store worker during a robbery. Thing is, though, Scotty Scott was the son of an Arkansas state trooper. They contact the Texas Rangers and say, do us a favor. So they get Henry to confess to that murder, and Scotty Scott gets out.
Yes.
And so we had all that kind of stuff that we were able to show our judge. But by then, our judge was already afraid. He saw what was happening to me. Mm-hmm. Channel 8 had already been to town doing their thing on me.
The Charles Duncan piece?
The Charles Duncan piece, the libelous episodes. They weren't through with them, but man, they had been causing a lot of stir, asking questions, telling everybody I was going to be indicted, all of that. And it scared this judge because if he saw what was happening to me, it could happen to him too. He was also, I found out later, was contacted by Judge Carter, who was the judge in Georgetown. What are you doing messing with our case, with our defendant? Carter is now a congressman.
Yeah.
He was contacted by the DA down there. He was also contacted by Colonel Jim Adams. Since they had already started and I'm going to get back to the Adams meeting in just a minute. Since they had already started a criminal investigation of me and they were saying it was Charles Duncan with Channel 8 that was going around saying it before the law enforcement would ever confirm or deny anything. That's just the way they do. Oh, we will not confirm or deny that. Is Feazell under investigation? So-and-so. Oh, we won't confirm or deny. Wink, wink, you know. And that's the way it was going. So it scared this judge. And he did not want that happening to him. So anyway, I go down to Austin, armed with all this stuff that we had gotten from Hugh Ainsworth and the stuff that Truman had pulled together for us. And we sit down and meet with Adams and we show him what we've got. And I say, Colonel Adams, we don't want to embarrass anybody. We don't really want to indict anybody. We want to give it to you and have you clean up your own backyard. Mm-hmm. Do something to the men that have been suborning perjury, getting these false confessions, and reopen these Lucas cases. He did his fingers on his desk like this for a minute, and then he put his finger out there toward my face. He said, you know what? We're not going to open a single Lucas file, but I am investigating you. Wow, man. I could hear the buttholes pucker from the two guys that were behind me from the AG's office. Because one of the guys there, the reason Jim Maddox had sent him with me was because he was the lawyer for DPS. He would represent them when they'd get in trouble. So he knew Adams, and Adams trusted him. And Maddox knew that if Reed Lockhoof was saying this, because Reed was a really good lawyer. Mm-hmm. All these guys are dead now. It's sad. And Adams pretty much just dismissed us right then. Get out of my office. I got nothing to say to any of you.
There's nothing ambiguous about that threat.
Nothing. No. Nothing. We're not opening a single Lucas case, but I am investigating you. And I found out later that from that very moment through my trial, that this one investigator, Ron Border, did nothing but work on me full-time. Full-time. Him and several FBI agents and some more DPS people. I mean, it was a big show when I got arrested. There were like 30 of them there. And all the big brass from DPS was there. But when Reed Lockhoof got me out in the hall, we were right outside Adams' door, and he goes, he put his finger over his mouth, tell me, don't say a word, don't say a word. So we walked all the way out of the building. And this was in the 80s. This was before there was recorders and cameras everywhere. And that was all new to me. Mm-hmm. And Reed says, we can't say anything in there. He's got the whole place bugged.
Wow.
Yeah. And out in the parking lot, he said, Vic, I'm scared. I've never seen anything like this.
This is the lawyer for the DPS?
Yes.
That had to get your attention.
It did. It did. But then what do? Your back's to the wall. They're investigating me anyway. What do you do? So I just kept going forward. It was after that we found out that Judge Allen was pulling the plug on our grand jury.
And then the shit hits the fan.
Yeah, it did.
Let's talk about September 17th, 1986. Describe that day.
Well, on September 17th, 1986, this Lucas thing had already been going on for close to a year and a half. We started investigating Lucas in late 1984. Just behind the scenes, Truman doing his thing, us talking to Hugh Ainsworth before the grand jury. The grand jury didn't start until I got back from trying Munir Deeb on a change of venue on the Lake murder case in Cleburne, and that was in the spring of '85. From the spring of '85, when we started that grand jury, and especially right after the meeting with Jim Adams, rumors started circulating that I was going to be indicted. It's going to be this Friday. It's going to be next Friday. It's going to be Thursday.
You're hearing this, but indicted for what?
I didn't know. But I knew that they were questioning anybody they could. If there'd be somebody in town arrested for a big haul of drugs, somebody I'd never heard of, had never had any contact with, never prosecuted, never been to dinner with, didn't know, I would find out that the assistant U.S. attorney was pulling them out of the jail and taking them over to the federal courthouse and offering them immunity if they would tell him something on me. Now, you got some of those drugs from Feazell, didn't you? I mean, he's involved in it some way, isn't he? Not just with drugs, John, but they did the same thing to me with an Afro-American burglary ring they tried to connect me to. A guy named Danny Arichika, who is a small-time Waco criminal, they arrested him. They brought him in and said, you got a lot of cases pending with us and with the state. We'll take care of them. Just tell us something on Feazell. Wow. He wouldn't do it. They locked him up for like 6 weeks and wouldn't even let him see his wife.
Wow.
This is the kind of stuff that was going on. They wanted me so bad, John. So I didn't know what they were going to go after me for. I was accused of everything. And then Charles Duncan's investigative reports came out on Channel 8. 11 episodes. 11. Run on every Below channel in Texas. There are 3 or 4 in Texas, but they own 30-something across the United States. And everybody in Waco was seeing it from the Dallas station. And so we have Charles Duncan saying all this stuff about me. Matter of fact, our congressman at the time, Bob Pogue, great guy, I loved Bob Pogue. He had been in Congress since Franklin Roosevelt.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. He knew everything about agriculture. And he told me, he said, boy, they've done accused you of everything except sex with a dead girl or a live boy.
Give them enough time, they might get there too, right?
They probably would.
Wow.
And so, yeah, they accused me of just about everything. And so every month, and my phone would ring. And it'd be an anonymous call because, see, this was before caller ID, too. Tonight's the night, Vic. They're coming to get you. They're coming to get you. Well, on September the 17th, nearly a year and a half later after hearing that, for some reason, when I woke up that morning, I just had a funny feeling. And I've learned to listen to my gut over the years, and it really has helped me. It's an intuition thing. And I remember getting up early that day, maybe at 5, praying. I'd always pray and read the Psalms, because what David went through was what I was going through. And I told my wife, I said, you know, I just got a feeling, babe, I better wear something today that goes good with chrome. And she said, what are you talking about? I said, I just think this is the day. So I put on my best black suit and a red tie, because most time, unless I was in trial, I wasn't wearing a suit and tie. So I got dressed for the occasion. And pulled out for work. And when I pulled into my reserved parking space at the courthouse, I heard the tires squeal in behind me. 3 or 4 cars blocking me in. Mm-hmm. And they're all coming out at me. So the first thing I did was just take a good breath. I started practicing my breathing and accidentally learned how to meditate when I was 5 or 6 years old. So I did that. I got centered. I opened the car, and there they were to arrest me. And I don't know why I did it, but first thing I did was stick my hands straight out like this, and they cuffed me with my hands in front. Now, after I was found not guilty, they asked Byron Sage, the head FBI guy, is there anything you'd have done differently? He said, yeah, I'd have cuffed him in back. Because as they walked me around, I raised my thumbs in a real defiant thumbs up with the cuffs there. I say, you know what's going on here, and I'll still be proven right. Now, I call that thumbs up defiant because that's what the newspaper called it. But that really wasn't what it was to me, John. I'd been reading the Psalms so much and praying so much that when I raised those thumbs up, I knew that both thumbs were pointing to heaven. And one was saying, God is the reason I'm here. God is the reason I will be delivered. And that was my physical expression of my faith. Mm-hmm. And then with me saying to the cameras, you know what's going on here, and I'll still be proven right. So I was speaking on a couple different levels there. Same way Jesus did. Everything you read about Jesus, you got to peel the onion because he's talking on layer after layer.
He's talking on a level that we can't understand.
Sometimes,
yes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's infinite.
So wait a second. Now, you had 24 plus FBI agents and law enforcement show up to arrest you. Go through. Isn't this unusual for a public servant who might be under suspicion for something? Don't they normally say, once you turn yourself in and not make a big fanfare out of it? The media was there to film it?
Absolutely. Channel 8 themselves had 5 cameras there. 5. All the way down from Dallas, 90 miles away.
They weren't going to miss anything.
Weren't going to miss it. They broke into the soap operas, live coverage, to show me being arrested. Really? Yeah. Yeah, my lawyer, Gary Richardson, had been the U.S. attorney, not an assistant, the U.S. attorney for the Eastern District of Oklahoma, appointed by Ronald Reagan. And Gary said to the cameras, I prosecuted 30 public officials while I was the U.S. attorney, and we never made a show arrest like this on any of them. We would call their lawyers and tell them to turn themselves in. And we would do it like that. He said, this is retaliation. This is just a show. And that's exactly what it was. It was just for a show. But yeah, I knew in my heart that was going to be the day. But I didn't think about what I was going to say. I didn't think about what I was going to do. It was like when you and I were talking at lunch, when Jesus would tell his disciples, when you're called up before the councils, when you're called up before the synagogue, don't worry about what you're going to say. The Spirit will give you the words. And sure enough, that's what happened. And all of that came full circle 30-something years later when that DNA came out about Rita Salazar. You know what's going on, and I'll still be proven right.
What was happening while you were being arrested? What was happening with your wife and your son, and then at your home?
At the same time I was arrested, 15 agents arrested me. 15 more descended on my house. My wife and my son were having breakfast at a local restaurant where she would usually take him. He had his favorite waitress there and his favorite pancake dish, and they had just ordered. And Greg Rampton was there. He's an FBI agent, a crooked bastard, I'm telling you. I hope he hears this and sues me because I can prove what I'm saying is true. He's been involved in so many shady things. He was always a fixer for the FBI and used for political purposes. He's the one who ran the Bry Lab investigations against Maddox and Jim Hightower and Gary Morrow, all the top Democrats at the time. It was his job working with Karl Rove. I don't know, you remember that name, the Kingmaker, Karl Rove, to get rid of every Democrat that had any kind of future in the state. And so he was Karl Rove's junkyard dog. And I don't remember why I got off on talking about him.
Talking about what happened with your wife and
oh
and your son.
yeah, he ran the search of my house. He stood there at the door of the restaurant and waited for their food to be served. And then he and a lady FBI agent walk in and they tell them, "Get up, you got to come with us." She goes, "Why?" He said, "We're arresting your husband and we're searching your house. We have a warrant." And my son was only, I think, 3 years old still. Yeah, he wasn't quite, or he had just turned 4. That was it. He had just barely turned 4, because he turned 4 on September the 10th, and this was September 17th. And he wanted to finish his pancakes, and he didn't know who these mean people were making him leave the restaurant. But his mom said, "Come on, Greg, we got to go." And they go out to the car, and he's used to sitting in the front with his mom in his little car seat. Well, they throw the car seat in the trunk, and they make him sit in the back with an FBI agent. And an FBI agent sits in the front with my wife and makes them drive back to the house. And when they get to the house, there are like 5 or 6 cars at the house with FBI agents waiting to get in. And it was in the back seat of that car that my little 4-year-old son sees the gun on the FBI agent's waist, and it scared him really bad. He had nightmares about that for years. We sent him to a child psychologist, and he would draw pictures of what he was afraid of, and he would always just use, there are all these colors there, but he only used black. I still have them somewhere. And these black stick figures of men with guns. Wow. He said, "That's what I'm afraid of." Wow. And he had a lot of issues over that. He couldn't sleep. While they were searching the house, my wife asked, could I at least turn on the TV so my little boy can have something to watch besides you guys? Mm-hmm. So Greg Rampton goes over and he pulls the knob and the TV comes on. First thing, and there I am in handcuffs. Wow. So that freaked him out too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, he was glad to see me that night. He didn't think he would ever see me again. He was afraid I was going to be arrested too, even when he was 3. Because he went to Montessori school, mm-hmm. and the kids there would hear about it from their parents. And they'd say, "Your dad's going to get arrested. Your daddy's going to get arrested." I remember I was driving him to school one morning, and he wasn't his chatty little self. He was sitting there really sad, and his lip was kind of down. And I was lost in thought. We were nearly to school before I noticed he hadn't been talking. I said, "Greg, what's wrong, buddy?" He looked up at me, and his little lip was just a quivering. He said, "I don't want you to go to jail, Daddy." Mm. Oh my God, can you imagine how that made me feel? And I said, "Don't worry, I'm not going to go to jail." But it really was a burden on him. And it messed him up, John. He never got over it. It was a year after that my wife realized that this brand new bottle of NyQuil she had bought and put in our medicine cabinet wasn't there. Mm-hmm. And so she thought she had just forgotten to buy it. So she bought another one, put it there, just to have on hand. And a few weeks later, she noticed it's not there. So she searched Greg's room, and she found it in his room.
Wow, he's 5 years old.
5 years old, and he's self-medicating. He said, "'Cause I can't go to sleep.
Oh, man.
I'm afraid of the men with guns." And that was the beginning of my son's battle with drugs.
Yes.
And
It's to numb the pain.
I sent him to rehab after rehab. I probably spent, I couldn't even guess how much, over 100,000, maybe 200, on rehabs and doctors and everything to try to help. And he would do better. He even worked for me for 2 years. He was the best legal assistant I ever had, except for Jonathan. And but sometimes we'd find him passed out at his desk.
Yeah.
His hands swollen really big. He wouldn't take off the long sleeve shirt. His hands are swollen because he was shooting himself up so much. And 2 years ago, this December, he died.
Yes, we're releasing this on Monday, December 6th, which is the 2-year anniversary of the release of The Confession Killer. And I believe it was on the 10th of December that he died of a heroin overdose.
He did.
There is no word in the English language or any language to describe a parent who's lost a child. And I think it's too painful. You know, if you're a kid and you lose your parents, you're an orphan. If you're a wife and you lose your husband, you're a widow. But I think the loss of a child just cannot be described.
It's hard. It's real hard. His mom still cries a lot about it.
Sure.
I still think about him a lot. Christmas morning after he died, I got all of my crying over with in about an hour. I mean, it was
Because he was planning to come to Waco to spend Christmas
He was
with
coming to spend Christmas with me. On September the 7th or 8th, I got the sweetest email from him. He had just binge-watched The Confession Killer. He was in Acapulco at the time. He had a job working on a Mexican soap opera.
Yeah.
He was a little actor.
He was bilingual too. Yes.
He was bilingual, yeah. He could speak Spanish as good as somebody that grew up there. Matter of fact, he was so good at it, he could talk to somebody from Mexico for 5 minutes and tell them which part of Mexico they grew up in.
He knew the
accent.
dialects. Wow,
He did.
That's great.
And so he'd been hired to for a bit part on a soap opera. And they liked him so much that even though his character in that soap opera died, they had him dye his hair black, and they were bringing him back the next season as this guy's twin brother.
They do that in soap operas. You never die, you know?
You don't die in a soap opera. Yeah. So he had his black hair, and he was all excited, and he was telling me how much he loved The Confession Killer, and he was looking forward to coming for Christmas. And then I started sending him emails. Greg, I want to get the airplane ticket to you. How do I get the ticket to you? And he wouldn't answer me.
It always sends up alarms. Yeah.
My last email to him is, Greg, please answer this email so I don't think you're dead. And then that's when we got the call the next day. They had been found in the hotel room, and he'd been dead a couple days.
Yeah. That's awful. Awful doesn't even scratch the surface.
Yeah. Now, he had messed around with heroin a lot. He had gotten to where he said, Dad, I can handle it. I just do it occasionally just for fun. But that's about the time that all that fentanyl stuff started coming out. So there's no telling what killed him, John. But when they found him, he still had the needle stuck in his arm.
Fentanyl, probably. Very lethal. Let's take about a 5-minute break here, and then we'll come back. And we're going to start going through your trial.
Yeah.
And then your next trial.
Okay.
And we'll go from there. Okay?
All right.
And that concludes part 1 of my interview with Vic Feazell. Thank you for listening. We'll be back next week with part 2. You don't want to miss it because we connected some dots that were actually left out of The Confession Killer and clear some things up that were misconceptions after it. You don't want to miss it. It's been a great interview, and the second part is got more surprises for you. So thank you for being part of the show.